Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Wildcat by Hildie Mcqueen, narrated by Mhairi Morrison. Clan Ross of the Hebrides. This fictional story takes place at the beginning of the 17th century in the Scottish Hebrides, isles off the Isle of Skye's western coasts. In the 1500s, lordship over the Hebrides collapsed, and the power was given to clan chiefs: the MacNeil in Barra, the MacDonald, Clan Ranald, in South Uist, the Uisden in North Uist, and the MacLeod, the Isles of Harris and Lewis. For this series, I have moved the clans around a bit to help the story work better. The clans' locations in my books are as follows. The MacNeil will remain in Barra. The MacDonald, Clan Ranald, is moved to North Uist. The Uisden resides in Benbecula. The MacLeod remains in the Isles of Harris and Lewis. My fictional clan, Clan Ross, will laird over South Uist. Chapter 1. Summer 1603. South Uist, Isles of the Hebrides. Sheltered between a fallen tree and a boulder, Gideon Ross tried to rest. For 2 days straight, he and 2 guardsmen had been fighting against a band of rogues who were relentless in their pursuit. He and the 2 warriors had killed or maimed at least 6, but outnumbered, and with Gideon injured, they'd been forced to find somewhere to hide. They were about 2 days' ride northwest of Ross Keep. After days of avoiding the enemy, it was hard to gauge their exact location. One of the men, Eric Larson, had managed to sneak to a nearby creek and return with wineskins filled with water. "Drink it," Eric said. "Ye must keep up your strength." Despite doing his best to keep up a brave front, Gideon was losing the battle against his body. And, though he'd been a warrior his entire adult life and knew death was a possibility, concern for his friends took over. "Ye and Struan must go without me. Get help. I can remain hidden. Hopefully, they'll expect the 3 of us will have gone and not look for me." The cut he'd received along his left side was deep, and he'd lost a great deal of blood. Half-seated, wrapped in the other men's tartans, even the smallest of movements caused him crippling pain. In the last few hours, he found himself unable to move, much less stand and escape. He sensed the uncertainty his companions felt as they exchanged looks. Just like him, they knew if Gideon was found, the men they'd been fighting would not hesitate to kill him. Eric neared, his blue gaze meeting Gideon's as he pulled a dagger from his boot and placed it in Gideon's palm. The other warrior, Struan MacLean, placed the wineskins filled with water next to him. "Tell the laird I love him," Gideon managed, then hesitated to regain his composure. "Tell him he has been a good brother to me." "Do not speak that way," Struan said through gritted teeth. "You can say that to him in person upon seeing him again." With a final nod to Gideon, the 2 men disappeared into the foliage, as silent as the wind. Other than bird calls and the breeze rustling through the trees, it was quiet. Gideon strained to listen for any footfalls or sounds of men approaching. It wouldn't be long before they came to investigate the area, and he prayed they'd not find him. Time passed excruciatingly slow, the shadows stretching across the forest floor as the sun fell behind the horizon. The forest became abuzz with sounds of crickets and nocturnal animals leaving the safety of their dens and nests to forage for food. During the night, he continued to try and drink from the wineskin, though his hands shook so badly more water splattered on his face than made it down his parched throat. Every part of him burned. Even his eyes felt as if they were on fire. Knowing it was inevitable that he would lose consciousness, he used the last of his strength to drag himself further into the hollow of an overgrown bush. Letting out a shaky breath, he collapsed, trying not to groan in pain and alert anyone to his location. Barely able to lift the wineskin, Gideon managed to take a large swallow of water before surrendering to the darkness. It was hard to tell how much time had passed when the sound of voices brought him around. Unsure of what exactly was happening around him, he didn't open his eyes. Perhaps whoever it was would think him dead and continue past. "Seems they left this one and escaped," said a gruff voice. "How did they get away without us seeing or hearing them?" a different one asked. "Because the lot of ye are useless and expect me to do everything," the first man shouted. "I fell asleep for a moment and they got away." "What about him?" another voice said. "Looks like he's dead." Creaking wagon wheels and new voices sounded nearby. By the fast footfalls, the men who'd been standing near him ran off. Gideon opened his eyes enough to catch a view of the men hurrying to mounts and galloping away. He tried his best to move, managed to move just a bit, to get the attention of whoever approached, but his efforts brought waves of nausea and pain until he lost consciousness. "My goodness, the poor young man has no colour. I do not think he will survive." The voice of a woman floated over Gideon like a cloud in the sky, much too far to reach. "He is most attractive, is he not?" a second woman said. "We should try to find out where he is from. These tartans look very well made." Something poked him in the shoulder. "He's not moving. Seems as though he's dead after all," the first woman remarked. "The tartans will make good blankets for when winter comes." "Perhaps we should bury him," the second woman said. "He will stink up our cottage if we keep him inside." They moved away and cackled as they talked about something Gideon couldn't make out. Finally, turning back toward him, one of the women said, "We have to ensure he is indeed dead. One should not bury a living person. They will return to haunt us." One of them jostled him hard. Gideon felt as though his side was being ripped apart, and he groaned. Both women gasped. "See? I told you he's alive," one of the women said. "I suppose it's best we make a poultice for his wounds." All he wanted was water, but it proved impossible to speak past the dryness of his throat. He fought to open his eyes, but they felt as if stones had been placed upon them. Had they indeed placed rocks on his eyes? Often, when people expected someone was dead, stones were placed over their eyes. Panic surged inside Gideon. His eyes flew open, and he tried to sit up, only to scream out in pain when it felt as if the entire side of his body had torn open. The women, he now saw, were old. At least he thought they were, because at his sudden cry they shrieked and raced out of the cottage, giving him only a glimpse of grey hair and faded skirts. If not for the searing pain, he would have laughed aloud at the comical way they'd thrown their arms in the air and ran out so fast one had lost a shoe. "I do not mean ye harm," he managed to croak out. "I require help." His entire body shook as he half sat at an awkward angle, but he feared the pain that would follow should he attempt to lie back down. First, one face peered in from the door, and then a second. Both of the women obviously advanced in years by the deep creases on their faces. "Who are ye?" The one with the husky voice called out, her gaze pinning him. "Why were you left for dead?" "Gideon Ross, brother to the laird." He cleared his throat as best he could. "I was left behind by guards who went for help." The women walked back in, hurrying over to where he was. One placed a hand on his shoulder and gently pushed him back to lay down, while the other one grabbed a cloth and pressed it against his side. Gideon groaned loudly at the fire that seemed to run up and down his entire body. "I am Cumina, and this is my sister Dorothea. We will take you to the laird and collect our reward." It was obvious that Cumina considered herself the stronger of the two in opinion, because although Dorothea looked at him, she remained silent. "Water," Gideon said. Dorothea promptly brought him a cup of what turned out to be some sort of bitter concoction. Whatever it was didn't matter at the moment, because Gideon just wanted the throbbing to go away so he could rest and regain some of his strength. "To help with the pain," Dorothea explained. She attempted to straighten the kerchief on her head, but somehow managed to make it worse. The cloth slipped over one ear, and part of it covered the left side of her forehead. "I made it myself," she informed him with pride. "Water, please." "Go fetch water from the well, Dorothea," Cumina ordered. "We need to bathe him and have him presentable." Gideon bit back a curse. The last thing he wanted was the two over-eager women to bathe him. Instead, he closed his eyes and blew out a breath. "How did you get me here?" Cumina slid a look in his direction. "Back of our cart. My sister and I put you on it. It was a struggle, but we are stronger than we look." "How far from Keep Ross?" The woman looked up to the ceiling. 5 days. "On horseback?" "No, by cart, with our mule. He's old." The sun was setting when the sisters finally left him be. He'd given up trying to dissuade them from the bathing, and instead tried to endure it. First, they'd made a mess of things while attempting to wash him. Then they had jostled him until he thought being unconscious wasn't such a bad idea while they replaced the soaked bedding. By the time they gave up, all three were exhausted, and Gideon didn't feel any cleaner. The meal one of the sisters had concocted was a lamb stew. Dorothea fed him like a babe, since he lacked the strength to do it himself. At last, he was left to his thoughts when the women had gotten into their cots and gone to sleep. As the women slept, the sounds of their snoring filled the space, and Gideon could assess what he needed to do. From questioning the sisters, he found out they'd discovered him during one of their walks to the forest to snare rabbits. Somehow, they'd managed to bring their cart close to where he was and then loaded him onto it. Gideon expected someone had helped them, but they would not admit to it. He wondered if it was a relative who was in hiding. His eyelids felt heavy, and he knew he had to get home to be treated by a properly trained healer. If the old women truly planned to take him to the keep, it would be helpful if they had a healthier horse. On the floor, next to the cot, were some of his belongings. He reached for his sporran and found that the women had not gone through it because inside were two things that were of value: soft satin ribbons and his money pouch. The next morning, Dorothea helped Gideon relieve himself, and then the three of them shared porridge and tea. Despite their humble status, the women kept a rather tidy cottage. They had plenty of cups and plates, and the bedding was clean and serviceable. The cottage was well built, with a fireplace on one end, and plenty of room for 2 beds, a table, and their kitchen area. There were 2 windows, one beside the door and one on the opposite side, so they could be opened to allow for airflow. Both had shutters to keep out the rain and the cold. "Who built this cottage for you?" Gideon asked as they broke their fast. Cumina's smile showed missing teeth. "The owners of the land are most kind to us. We are fortunate." "Who are these people?" The sisters exchanged looks. Then Cumina spoke again. "We cannot tell you. You might expect us to fetch them, and they will think we attacked you." He considered pointing out that they would have had a hard time beating a warrior of his size, but instead bent his head and thought of how to get them to tell him. "I want to give you coin to get a horse so that we can arrive back at my brother's keep faster. I will ensure ye are generously rewarded for what ye have done for me." The women were silent, seeming to decide what was best to do. It was understandable that they feared going to whoever owned the lands and admitting to having a warrior in their midst, as landowners could be offended if it turned out to be an enemy. However, there, on the Isle of Uist, almost everyone, except for a group on the southwestern shore, was under the protection of, or allied to, Clan Ross. Gideon did not have the time or the strength to argue with the women, and it was imperative that he not anger them, lest they decide not to help him get home. There was little he could do for himself, as the fever lingered, and his strength had not returned. Finally, Cumina agreed to get a horse and sent Dorothea off to purchase one that would not bring any attention to them. Dorothea would claim the coin for the purchase came from them selling off their own mule and cart. As they waited, he drank more of the bitter tea, the pain ebbing just enough so that he could sleep for a while and hopefully be stronger for the travel ahead. Chapter 2. Alia Aldaba sat on the ground in the pens where the goats were kept. A newly born one lay in her lap, and she was content to remain there for as long as the wee one would sleep. Its mother kept an eye on her kid. At the same time, she seemed glad to be able to prance about and eat without the little one constantly underfoot. Just then, Alia caught movement out past the short fencing at the edge of the forest. A familiar figure hurried toward where she was. At seeing only one of the elderly sisters, who often came to help with the goats, Alia lifted the slumbering kid and placed it on the soft bedding of hay. With an eye on the woman, she walked out of the pen and went to meet Dorothea. Surprisingly, for her advanced age, the woman was not out of breath, her gaze moving from Alia to the back of her large family home. "I must speak with one of your brothers," Dorothea exclaimed. "I am in need of a horse." The sisters had worked for her family for many years, helping to look after the goats. Once they became too old to keep up with the work, her father had generously built them a cottage to ensure they had a place to live out the rest of their days. The women now lived a humble but comfortable life. "Why do you require a horse?" Alia asked. "Did something happen to the mule? Ye and your sister cannot possibly control a horse. The animal will be much too strong." At her comment, Dorothea seemed at a loss. "Sister and I had not considered that. We allowed the bonny man to cloud our judgment." "What man?" Dorothea's eyes widened comically. "I do not know why I said that. There is no man." "Come now." Alia took the woman's arm. "How about we get you something to drink, and you can tell me what has happened?" They walked toward the pen, where the woman hesitated and looked to the animals. "They all look very well indeed," Dorothea stated. "Aye, they are thriving." Entering the kitchen, they found the cook, Mara, and a single maid. Mara immediately went to greet Dorothea, then settled her at the table with a large bowl of roasted meat and vegetables from the garden and a tall glass of water. Once settled, the woman seemed content with her meal and not in a hurry to speak. Finally, Alia could not keep quiet any longer. "I am willing to come and help with whatever needs to be done. Is there a man at your cottage that refuses to leave?" Caught off guard, Dorothea shook her head. "'Tis not that he refuses. He is too ill, may die." The woman began to eat anew, then stopped and gawked at Alia. "Do not tell your father. Cumina does not wish for him to think we are taking in male guests." Having to bite her tongue not to laugh, Alia nodded solemnly. "I will not breathe a word, I promise." Dorothea finished eating, and they packed a small pot of food for her to take back for the others at the cottage. Her father, mother, and younger sister had gone to visit a family half a day's ride away. Alia had not gone, since she wished to be home with the newly born goats. Besides, if she were to be honest, it was a good way to avoid her mother's attempts at any matchmaking. However, after 2 days home with only her brothers, Abram and Tal, for company, she'd grown bored. Although Abram and Tal were there on the property, they spent all day out at the corrals or the stables with the horses. Her father had recently hired a horse breeder who was to remain for the season. The man, who was an expert in breeding and training horses, was tutoring her brothers. After finding her small dirk and stashing it in her boot, Alia returned to the kitchen to fetch Dorothea. "Mara, I will be home shortly. I will be taking your cart, so Dorothea does not have to walk home." Alia walked outside and headed to the stables. Once there, she found Tal and informed him of her plans, not mentioning anything about the possibility of a man. Since the older women lived just past the tree line, on the edge of her family's lands, they did not bother offering to escort her. Instead, he helped hitch a tame mare to the small wagon, and Alia guided the horse to the goat pens, where Dorothea waited with the pot and a sack of the other items she'd asked for from Mara. "We can borrow this cart," Dorothea announced as they rode to her cottage. "This mare will make quick travel to the keep." Alia had learned a long time ago never to tell Dorothea a secret, because without meaning to, she often spoke her thoughts aloud. It was comical how she rarely realized she was doing so, unless questioned. Alia remained silent for a few beats, hoping to learn more about whoever visited the sisters. "I am not sure you wish to travel so far unescorted," Alia said. "Not too long ago, horses were stolen from our land. There are dangerous people who would not hesitate to steal the horse and cart from 2 defenseless women." Dorothea sighed. "What you say is true." Upon approaching the cottage, Cumina rushed outside, and upon seeing Alia, she seemed relieved. "He fell. I cannot get him up." Along with the 2 women, Alia rushed into the cottage, only to stop at seeing a naked man sprawled on the floor, panting. Alia treaded closer and peered down at him, her breath catching at realizing who he was. "What is Gideon Ross doing here?" "We found him," Cumina replied, moving to stand beside the man, who mumbled incoherently. "We are taking him to the keep." Alia rushed to the cot and grabbed the blanket and put it over him. It was obvious from his flushed appearance and the beads of sweat on his forehead he was feverish. She leaned over and touched his face, and indeed he was quite hot. "Fetch a bucket of water from the well," she called out over her shoulder to Dorothea, and then rushed to the nearby table and grabbed cloths from a neatly folded pile. "Honestly, Cumina, you should know how to care for a fevered person. Why is he not being bathed with cold water and his injury bandaged?" "He kept fighting, is crazed with pain, and will not allow us near the wound." The woman peered at the rather reddish wound. "I did put a poultice on it, but it seemed to make matters worse." "It looks to be festering," Alia said. Then, upon the bucket of water being brought, she dunked the cloths into it, and without wringing them, began running the cool cloths over his face and chest. Since he lay on his uninjured side, she went ahead and took a closer look at the wound. It seemed he'd been cut through with a sword. "Was there no one with him?" "No, we found him alone, tucked in the hollow of a bush. It was as if they left him on purpose." "They should be returning then," Alia said. "I will send a messenger to the laird once we get him to my home." She rinsed the wound out, but did little else. Mara was an accomplished healer and would take care of it once they got him settled at her house. The women had nothing to bandage him with, so Alia removed her underskirt and tore it into wide strips, and, with the sisters' help, wrapped it around Gideon's midsection. Once that was completed, she covered him from the waist down with a blanket and studied his handsome, flushed face. Currently, his dark tresses were swept away from his face, and his skin was golden from the sun. His long lashes fanned over the tops of his cheekbones. Her gaze moved down his face to a square jawline and appealing lips. Gideon Ross was the one man she dreamed of for many years, the one she'd hoped to catch a glimpse of whenever she was fortunate enough to travel with her family to the Ross Keep, which was rare. The last time she'd seen Gideon was when he and 3 of his men had come to her home just a few months earlier. They'd been ordered by the laird to check on local families, as bands of renegades had been attacking people, taking what they wished, often leaving dead and wounded behind. Now, as she reached to brush hair from his brow, her breath caught. Had he been in a battle against men that were in the area and could possibly come to her home? "I must hurry and fetch someone to help. Do not leave the cottage until we send someone to patrol and ensure no one is about." She straightened, and with one last look at Gideon, raced out to the waiting cart and urged it the short distance to the stables. Gideon was settled into a bedchamber near the kitchens. Since Mara usually took care of any men in her father's employ who were injured, the bedchamber had been set up for that specific purpose. It turned out that he actually had 2 wounds, one on his left side and another higher under his arm. His moans had echoed throughout the house the entire time Mara treated and thoroughly cleansed the wounds. Sitting on the bed next to him, Alia's heart went out to him at hearing his incoherent mumbling from the intense pain. She spoke to him in soft tones and ran a wet cloth over his face to calm him. But it was obvious he was oblivious to his surroundings. A short time later, after being given a strong tincture, he fell into a sound sleep. "How is he?" Alia asked, walking into the kitchen the next morning. "Awake and quite cross," Mara replied with a huff. Seems to think I am the devil for causing him so much pain that now he can barely move." "Did he say what happened?" Alia asked, straining to look towards the open door of the bedchamber he was in. "He asked."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?